All right, let's talk about bridge approach fills. I'm not Aaron Griffith, I'm Aaron Yearwood. Anybody done this? Maybe you did it on the way here to the training. You hit some of these. Yeah, it felt like it probably, right? Spill your coffee on the way here. That was in another state, right? No, this is a nationwide problem, right? Our bridges, we like to blame it on the roadway tie-in. They like to blame it on us. Regardless, it's a problem. Because we're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars and millions of dollars doing this or grouting with grout. So these guys here are injecting polyurethane foam into a settled approach slab. Okay, we have DOT crews that do it internally. We use grout. And so we are spending lots of money when our approach slabs settle to jack them back up so we get a good ride, right? So we're not jumping on these bridges. So again, it's a major problem. So in 2021, we sent out a structure bulletin, and now all y'all know how to get a hold of the structure bulletins because you've all signed up for them, right? But in 2021, we sent one out, and we also wrote a memo from the state construction engineer, and we had some emphasis areas because we were seeing a lot of issues. And so we basically said, hey, we want to do some increased inspections within 50 feet, take some more soil densities close to the back slopes. We want to get more compaction on our stone in our backfill area. And then limit the lift thickness of of the stone in that area. And we added a layer of geotextile a foot below the approach slab. And the reason for that is our approach fills are filled with 78M or 57 stone, a lot of voids in between that, right? When you inject polyurethane foam and grout, where does all that grout go? Into all those voids. So we decided we were going to add a layer of geotextile a foot below so that when they actually do have to pump, hopefully it gives it some base to not continue to go through there, and they actually can jack it up and not spend a lot more money and wasted material. So those were our emphasis areas. Still having some issues. So let's look at where we can get settlement from. When we put embankment that there's no embankment before, and we build an embankment, we're putting this load on there, it's that weight of that new load is going to consolidate that ground, right? It's just going to happen. And it's all dependent on the type of soil, the amount of water, and so forth. And so you can get consolidation of the natural ground. When we build our embankments, we have specs, we take densities, right? But depending on the type of material, how well they do that density is just a representative sample. They put too thick of lifts, they don't build it properly, don't get enough compaction, we can get settlement in our embankment. And then the third place is the approach fill settlement, where we're putting our stone in, we can get settlement. We can lose material, right? We get voids, then that starts to lose material, we can get settlement. Which ones do we have control over in this room since Tom Santee and Geotech left? Which ones do we have control over? Approach fill and embankment if you're a roadway inspector, right? So we have that control. Number one, the consolidation, Geotech's going to tell us that, right? They know, they've got it modeled, they know the borings, they know how much weight we're putting on it from that embankment. They can predict pretty reasonably close how much settlement over time they can anticipate because of that. And it's going to happen, so they account for that. Have you ever had a settlement period on your project, right? You build it up, you have to wait a month, 2 months, 6 months, monitor it sometimes. That's up for Geotech. We're going to trust that they're doing that right. The next thing is embankment settlement. Sometimes we have settlement times on that as well. So Geotech will tell us we don't have that modeled as much because we don't know exactly the material they're going to use. But proper installation, density test to confirm that they're doing it correctly, those things can control if we have any settlement there. And then the approach fill settlement, based on how good of a detail we have and how good of a job we do building it, those are things that are in our control. So we're in the middle of doing our roadway standard drawing upgrade just like we are, or update just like we are the specs. And so we are looking at doing 2 different types of approach fills with alternates for integral abutments. So the integral abutments are when the concrete's poured around the ends of the girders, and instead of having an expansion joint, they kind of move back and forth, the piles bend a little bit. And so contractors sometimes will build up a temporary fabric wall behind it, because you don't pour that top part of the integral of the cap until after the deck is poured. It's the last thing you do. So they'll build up a temporary wall behind it so that they can walk right up on the deck instead of having a big hole there. So that's what that 1A and 2A are for, so they can have that alternate. So we thought we were done with these drawings. We've been talking about this for about 2 years now. Well, since 2021, so yeah, 2 years. We had proposed changes, and we realized that there was an issue with our details about 2 or 3 weeks ago in Winston-Salem at the structure training, so we're kind of back to the drawing board, but I'm going to show you some of the changes that we're making. First of all, we're going to continue to show that geotextile below our approach slab. It's going to be 6 inches. At least that's where we're showing it right now. This is one of the big changes I think is going to improve. We're going to actually require a temporary slope. They're going to have to overbuild the embankment, right? Because right now, our specs, if you got an embankment, all they have to do is build it to the bottom of the cap. Years ago, we used to make them build the whole embankment all the way up. Then they had to cut back out for the indent. Well, now the specs allow them to build to the bottom of the cap, and that allows them to start on the bridge construction. But what we're going to do is we're going to, when they finish building the rest of this embankment out of soil, we're going to make them overbuild it. And the reason that is when you compact in that edge, right, you're not going to get all the way up on that roller. You can get close to it, but you're not going to get compaction all the way to that edge. So we're going to make them build that 3 feet more, and then they're going to cut that back out. So they've got good compaction in that area. So we feel like that will be a big improvement. And then this back slope, there used to be 2 different details. One was for like our sub-regional, like cord slabs and box beams and so forth. And it was, I think you came back and sloped it at a 1-to-1. And then our other bridges, you'd slope it at come back like 4 feet beyond the approach slab. This one, we're basically saying you're just going to go 1.5 to 1. Wherever it ties on the approach slab is where it ties. Okay, so that changes. Kind of combine those 2 details. And we're also going to raise up the bottom of it about a foot, 12 inches or so off the bottom. Okay, you see our pipe here. This is where we found the problem. You see how it's going to force you by raising it up, force you to go through the wing wall. We want to raise that up, but the problem that somebody pointed out is when you do that and you have that fixed point on the wing wall, and if you do get settlement, we've had that pipe get crushed and broken and break the joints. And so what we're talking about doing is just eliminating the pipe. So we'll still have it drain to that spot and drain over to the wall. It'll go through the type 1 geotextile. We might put some hardware cloth there, and it'll just drain through. And we'll have a pipe. We'll still have the pipe that sticks out from the wing wall out to our drainage. Yep. What's that? Oh, okay. Sorry. Yep. Okay. So there we go. See through our wing wall there. That's the sleeve. So we're still working out the details. So this, you'll see what the final details show. So don't get too hung up on that. We'll get those out, and they'll be ready for the spec. This is the alternate for the integral abutment. You can see the temporary wall that you can build up here behind your integral indent. This is a detail for MSE walls. So currently these are in your set of plans. They're not a standard drawing. These have not really changed much from what's in your plans, but we're going to make it part of the standard drawings. And then here's the alternate for the integral. For the integrals with the MSE wall. So again, don't want to get too hung up on this, but I do want to drive home some points here. We've got these emphasis areas, and the special provisions are actually going to require some of these things instead of them just being an emphasis area. So we're going to start saying you have to take a density every 2 feet lift when you're within 50 foot of a bridge. All right, so if you're a roadway density person, sorry, it's a little bit more densities, but we want to ensure that there's more samples. We're getting really good compaction in that 50-foot range. That area around where we're cutting back to, we want to get some densities in that area to make sure they're getting good compaction in that zone. We're going to actually require smaller lifts on our stone. Some people think that stone is self-compacting. It still requires some compacted effort, and putting in a 12-inch lift with a little small plate tamp is not getting it. All right, we've got to put it in with like a Ramex, a trench roller, and smaller lifts. Okay, so that's going to help. One thing we have noticed, MSE walls, a lot of times we'll build them out of stone. You're putting big smooth drum rollers in there. We don't notice the settlement like we do in our approach fields. So some of that's because they're rolling it more. So we're going to we can't still get those big equipment in there, but we can get a little bit heavier equipment, and we can roll it more and do smaller lifts. And then we're going to be looking at either, it might be in your plans, you might have like a waiting period after you do your approach fill, or they're doing this in the West, they're actually driving hubs in their approach fill, and they're shooting them weekly or every few days, and they're monitoring the settlement. And so they're actually putting something, like it's not a settlement gauge like you have the full settlement gauge we do sometimes on our embankments, but they're just doing this as a plan note and putting hubs in there and shooting it until it stops settling to a certain amount, and Geotech would make that decision. And they could put in there that it's estimated to take 1 month or 2 months, so the contractor knows. So those are some of the things that you might see in your plans. And again, time is in our favor with settlement, all right? Do we want to pour our approach slab if it's still settling, knowing it's going to go down? No. So one thing that's not required, but I like to do is I like to shoot a couple points on the approach slabs, mark them, and then when they pour it, so that I know sometimes they pour them low, right? They pour them low when we're starting off low. That's a bad thing because it's going to go down, right? So I like to know my starting point. So that's a good check to do. You know, it's just a good recommendation. How do you set into your approach slab? Do you shoot it by the theoretical grade when you pour your approach slab? Is that how y'all set your grades and your headers for your approach slabs? Or how do you do it? String line, right? What if we build things perfectly? We try to, right? But if I build my deck off and then I set my approach slab to a theoretical grade, they might not match. So I'm pulling string lines, right? But what if I'm in a vertical curve? Can I just rely on that string line? I've got curvature in it. Now, granted, it's only maybe 25 feet or 15 feet. There's probably not a lot. But if I string line off that bridge and pull my string line from my approach slab and I haven't taken into account that vertical curve, I might be setting my grade wrong on my approach slab. So you got to take that into account. You might have to shoot some shots and plot it and build that vertical curve in to set your header. Those are some things you can do. But definitely think about the string lining. Don't just let the surveyor come out and shoot you a shot. Say this is what the theoretical grade is and pour your approach slab to it. You're going to start off wrong. Finally, keep the water away from the indent. How many people have had an indent wash out because the storm drainage has come and washed out underneath your indent? Whole bunch of hands up here. Once that happens once, it's never going to be as good as it was originally. When you pour your indent, keep the water away. There's details with berms and slope drains. Once you fill up your approach fill before you pour your approach slab, same thing. That stone will wash away. Once you pour your approach slab, water's coming out your barrier wall, your deck, water's coming off your bridge. It's coming down there. It's going to wash away. All those phases, you've got to control that water. If you don't, it's going to start undermining. It's going to start undermining, creating voids. Once it does that, we have a potential place to lose material from then on out. We're going to be out here spending hundreds of thousands of dollars pumping these things up. You can get the contractor to flow fill it during the life of the job, but what happens when they're gone? We're dealt with. It's our maintenance costs. So we've got to do this. If they don't want to do it, it's hard sometimes. Got a roadway contractor, bridge sub. If they don't do it, residents, assistants, shut the work down. You got to control the water. Okay. This is just a quick picture showing the difference between the Ramex and the plate tamp. We want to use a little bit bigger equipment, and that's going to be required. So we got to stop this. It's fun maybe sometimes and a little exciting, but we don't want this. We want to get a smooth riding bridge. So any questions on a bridge approach fills?